Welcome back everyone to Exotic Rank Gaming, and today I'm going to be bringing you my Stamina Sorcerer build for the Summerset patch. This is a PvE DPS build, and let's get right into it. So first off, let's talk about the gear. I think that's what most people want to see, and one of the more important things this patch. So one new set and one old set that really hasn't been used too much. The newest set and the biggest one is Reliquians. And as you can see here, light and heavy attacks apply a stack of harmful winds to your target for 5 seconds. Harmful winds deal 378 physical damage every 1 second. Each stack increases the damage by 260 physical damage, 20 stacks max. So this is something that procs, and it gets up to 20 times, and each stack is doing damage every second. And so it's a lot of melee damage, and we're kind of going that route with the monster set that we picked to pair with it, which is Celine's. A lot of people have been finding that Celine's is proccing on cooldown, and I found this as well. Just because of Reliquians, it's proccing on cooldown. So every 4 seconds, basically, the bear is coming up and hitting the target. So this is really good for single target DPS, and similar to why this set that we're using, the new one, a lot of single target damage. Doesn't really buff any AoE damage here, so on trash pulls, Reliquians, not so great. But on single target fights, Reliquians is very good, especially fights that are long and you can kind of stand there and parse away on it. A lot of movement fights like Vhoff, the last boss there, the General Assembly, that one's going to be a little more difficult because it's going to be tough to keep Reliquians up. And so a lot of recommendations would be to change that maybe back to Automaton for the Stamina Sorcerer at least. Other classes can use other things, but the Stam Sort can still use Automatons instead of this in fights like that. And next we have Advancing Okada. And this is important because when Mechanical Acuity got nerfed and it's only proccing on direct damage, it's a lot more difficult now to get it to proc when we start our burst on the front bar, where most of our damage is coming from in terms of single target and spammables. So we're swapping to Advancing Okada, and the crit chance and the hits, the uptime of it, of our crit damage, and the damage that actually goes out at our crits, is really, really impressive. And since we can trait change the jewelry, this set is now very useful, and if anything, maybe could have even potentially outperformed, at least for the Stam Sort, Mechanical Acuity in terms of getting that crit up. And it's pretty consistent, so as long as we change our back bar rotation, which we'll go over when I discuss the rotation. We're using Advancing Okada weapons as well. Since it is a heavy set, we want to make sure we have 5 medium, so we use the jewelry and the weapons. The traits on the weapons are Nirnhoned and Infused. I got very lucky, and I've had none of these weapons before the patch, so I had to get all this after the Summerset released. But you want 2 daggers. Axe and dagger work. Axe is a little bit more RNG than having a sword instead of the dagger, because the sword gives you that flat damage bonus of like 2.5%, whereas an axe gives you a chance to proc a twin blade and blunt bleed. And so the axe will outperform the sword if you get lucky on its procs. I like the axe personally, but to each his own. Not a huge DPS difference, but ideally would be 2 daggers. And a Maelstrom bow. This is important as well, and have Nirnhoned on it. And then we run poisons right here. The damage health poisons. You may be competing with these poisons with other players in your group. If everyone's using the same poisons, you might be having competing uptimes. So you might want to coordinate that, but again, not a huge DPS difference. I rarely do when we do score pushes, coordinating, changing out the damage poisons, so not a huge deal. The other thing you're going to be competing for, though, and which is important to note, is Reliquians. So if you're in a group and all your Stam DDs are running Reliquians, you're going to notice your uptime on Reliquian is going to be lower. So ideally you would have one person running Imperfect and the other person running Perfected. This has been addressed and has been noted, and is something that I think is in the works of getting changed. I'm not 100% sure, but from what I've heard, it's something that's getting fixed and should be fixed because it's not intentional. If it is intentional, then it's going to be a little bit more difficult to have groups pushing out the same DPS as what was previously thought, because you'll have to change your gear. Now, I can touch more base on that when I discuss group composition for Stam DDs, but in the meantime, just know that if one person's running it, other people shouldn't be at the moment, unless you're running two different, if you're running Imperfect and Perfected. Something else to note about this set is that with these new trial sets, the gear is now Imperfect and Perfect. The one you're looking at right now is Imperfect, and the only difference is the 5-piece bonus also gives you an extra 1096 stamina. Now, if you have 2 pieces Imperfect and 3 Perfect, or however you want to combine them, you're not going to get, it's not going to count. The set bonuses won't count, so you can't mix and match. You have to either have all 5 Imperfect or all 5 Perfect. So that's something to note and be aware of. So don't go golding out your gear if some is Imperfect and others are Perfect, thinking it's going to work, because it won't. Other than that, that's pretty much it regarding gear. Let's discuss skills. Important skills to have. On our front bar, we use Shrouded Daggers, Rending Slashes, Rearming Trap, Hurricane, and Bound Armaments. I keep Bound Armaments on both bars just because of the max stam, and since light attacks are scaling off of max stam, and our damage scales off of max stam as well, I think it's important to keep max stam up. You could, however, run a Fighter's Guild ability on the back bar. I haven't necessarily extensively tried it in trials, but the difference would be nominal, if anything. So a lot of people are wondering why, why not use Crushing Weapon instead of Shrouded Daggers? The cost, the stam cost, is about the same, so it shouldn't be difficult to sustain either. The only reason I prefer Shrouded Daggers is because the single target damage difference is slightly lower from Shrouded Daggers than it would be on Crushing Weapon. But with Shrouded Daggers, as you can see, it hits up to 2 other enemies that are nearby, and it deals more damage on the first and second bounce subsequently. So this is a much stronger ability than Crushing Weapon just because of the AoE cleave that it provides. And on some of the bosses, like, you'll still have insanely high single target DPS, but also be hitting very huge AoE. And I'll put the link in the description of a video I uploaded in the first, I think, 2 weeks of Summerset coming out, maybe the first week, on a Hell Raw run on Rakodu. And with AoE cleave, I was able to hit something like 79k and 65k single target. So the class still performs really well, and that was without advancing Okada. With advancing Okada on Valerial, and I'll put that CMX post, the screenshot, in the description as well, I was able to do, I think, 71k single target. Granted, there was a lot of Major Slayer going out from other Nightblades in group that were using War Machine, but those are still extremely high numbers that people thought the Stam Sorc was going to be a dead class, and it's certainly not. But you also get insane AoE from it. So, again, to make a long story short, Shrouded Daggers is a very good skill I highly recommend using. You'll get lower parses with it on a dummy test, but in a raid scenario, it will perform better. Passives, you just want all your class passives, just have them all unlocked anyways. Especially Expert Mage, having those abilities slotted, your Sorc ability slotted from just all your classes, not even just Stormcalling, you're going to get extra bonus damage. So the other important things, obviously medium armor passives, your Fighter's Guild passives to get more of your weapon damage. And Undaunted is important. Racial passives as well. Alchemy passives, medicinal use to get pot up times. If you're trying to push scores and get high parses, you have to be using this, because the stam recovery and your buffs aren't going to last through if you don't have this leveled. And then, as you can see here, just have all these passives as well, and it's nice because your dual wield abilities deal 20% more damage against enemies under 25% health. So our Rending Slashes and Shrouded Daggers is kind of acting like an execute, and paired with our Bloodthirsty Jewelry, we're getting an extra 30% of all of our damage from all these 3 stacked. So very huge. Food that we're using, garlic cod with potato crust, just blue max stat food. If you're parsing on a target dummy, use Dubious Camoran Throne. If you're doing it solo, because you won't be able to sustain, you'd have to go full heavy attack rotation, and you wouldn't be able to do as well DPS, even though our stats will be lower with this. But in a raid, you are going to want to make sure that you're running buy stat blue food and getting orbs and synergies that you can use, and that's where Undaunted skill line comes in really clutch, so you get those resources back, and that's going to help you keep up a pretty much light attack rotation with a couple heavy attacks on your front bar, just to keep the resources up, just because the Stam Sort does not have anything built into its toolkit that provides its sustain. Other than that, let's see here. Bow, just make sure you have all these leveled, and we'll talk about the back bar. Endless Hail, Ramming Trap, we don't use this on the back bar, we just have it here for the extra weapon damage for the Fighter's Guild ability. Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection, and then we have Greater Storm Atronach. You can use the bow ulti, but I prefer this because even when I parse on a target dummy, the DPS difference is never more than 1,000, but this also in a raid scenario gives you or gives another ally Major Berserk if they activate it. Just hope it's not your tank, and increasing their damage done by 25% for 8 seconds. So if you do that and a Stam Blade gets it and they're on their burst, it'll really increase their DPS, and the group DPS will go up, which is why this is a much better skill if you're in group play. Some other important things to note is we are using the Lover, and we are a Vampire just for that recovery, because like I said, we suffer from recovery by quite a bit. Lover is really important because we increase our physical penetration by 3,990. Since Sunderflame and NMG have been nerfed, we use the Lover instead. And that gets us pretty close to pen cap. If you're not at pen cap in your group, or your group is missing debuffs or debuff uptimes are bad, you can just run Krogs instead of Selines. DPS difference, it's going to go down, like, your DPS would go up if you're under penning, if you use this set. But if you're over penning with this set, you're obviously going to do less, because the 1-piece bonus becomes null and void, and the 2-piece bonus does not do nearly as much as the 2-piece bonus on Selines. So that's just something to figure out. So if you don't have it, download CMX, figure out where you're, I'll show you right here. Hopefully we have something I can load. I guess I'll just load this. So this is that Rakodu parse I was talking about. So like as you can see here, I was underpenning by a lot, and I was using Selines, but the DPS is still good. But Krogs probably would have given me a little bit more DPS just because I was underpenning so hard, like by 1,000, 58% of the time, and then 14,000 for 40% of the time. So that's something that's a little more difficult, but you can mitigate that by champion points. So let's get into those. I'll talk about green and red trees first. Use Mooncalf, 100, 75 in tenacity. It's really just helping our recovery, and since we do 2 heavy attacks on the front bar, you do want to have some points in here just to get more resources back. And then just put these wherever the trial needs are kind of fit. I like Warlord just for breaking free, especially in some of the newer trials. There are a lot of stun mechanics, and then blocking. You can do tumbling, whatever fits your needs. Again, red tree is trials dependent, so the standard obviously is like 49, 49, 48, and then however many points in between these. But again, find out the CP for the trial you're in, and that will keep your survivability up. Blue tree, I do 66 precise strikes. We want our crit damage to be pretty heavy, just because we are building ourselves with Advancing Okada, equipping ourselves with that tool, and we have high crit chance, so we want our crits to hit hard. Thaumaturge, we have a lot of AoE dots, so beef that up a little bit. 49 into Mighty, and then I put 30 into Piercing. Again, this is group and trial dependent. It's going to be very difficult this patch to be steady and set on what your group penetration is going to be, because if you don't have a Stamplar, you're missing out on Minor Fracture. If your buff up times kind of vary between groups that you're running with, it might, or debuff up times, I mean, you're going to need more in Piercing. So try and figure out where the best spot is. It's okay to overpen a little bit just to be safe, but don't be overpenning by like more than 1,000, or else you're really losing out on a lot of damage that you could be buffing up in these CP trees. And then 44 Master at Arms, we have that direct damage with our Shrouded Daggers, so that's the main thing we want to buff as well. So I put quite a few points into here to help with that. Other than that, that's CP. So let's discuss rotation real quick. So going into it, we start with Hurricane to buff up. We start in the back bar. We do Endless Hail, light attack, Ramming Trap, light attack, Razor Caltrops, light attack, Poison Injection, and we bar swap Poison Injection. We do heavy attack, Rending Slashes, light attack daggers, light attack daggers, light attack daggers, light attack daggers, heavy attack, Hurricane, and bar swap. And then when you come here, you're going to do Endless Hail, light attack, Razor Caltrops, light attack, Poison Injection, bar swap, heavy attack, trap. And the reason we're doing that is once we ended our first back bar dot rotation and we got all those up, we swapped to the front bar. Now we're getting our crit chance building up. So what we really want to do is we want to make sure we hold that. And so if you apply too many dots on the back bar, you're going to drop your Berserking Warrior uptime. So I'll show you real quick. Let me target 2 times. I don't have it in Surrendar, but you'll see it down here, right? We have 5 stacks of Berserking Warrior. And it's about to, when I go to my back bar, bam, fell off. It only lasts for 5 seconds, so let me do this, I'll show you. So it's at 5 stacks, go back bar. If I do all 4 skills on the back bar, it's very close. Like, that could even be dependent on server lag, that you could potentially lose all that crit chance. That's like 2,000 crit chance, the stack that you could lose. So what we do instead is we have Rearming Trap on the front bar, which people were slotting a Fighter's Guild ability instead of Blade Cloak before Summerset. You just weren't using it on the front bar. Well, now we're actually using it, and we're not using it on the back bar. So how it goes is this. And then Rending Slashes, light attack into these. And that keeps the stacks up. As you can see, if you take a look down there at my buffs, didn't drop. Now the other main thing to note is I'm doing 4 Shrouded Daggers. It gets really close to having Endless Hail fall off, but it increases your DPS so much because your Shrouded Daggers are doing so much. Even a single target, you really, really, really want to aim for 4 Shrouded Daggers, 4 Shrouded Dagger light attack weaves per rotation. If you are running out of resources, say you fall below like 11%, you're around 7k stam, I would recommend doing like, you know, instead of 4 light attack weave Shrouded Daggers, do 3 light attack weave Shrouded Daggers, and one of those be a heavy attack instead. So like, say for instance, heavy attack, trap, heavy attack, rending, and then 3 heavy attack. So you're doing 3 and 3 basically, but typically you want to do 4 and 2 for light attacks to heavy attacks. That will keep your sustain up even when you're getting orbs and synergies. You have to do that. And that's why when I parse on a 6 mil, I use Dubious Camoran Throne. You're going to see my stats are pretty low, but this is going to make it a lot easier to show you and to parse if you're doing solo parses, you don't have orbs and whatnot, because it's very difficult to sustain on a 6 mil without that, especially if you don't have major fracture, you're not doing as much damage, the fight's going to take longer, and the Stam Sword just can't sustain it. So on a 6 mil, the parse is going to look a little worse because, well, it won't look worse, but the total damage is going to be less than what it typically would be. 1, because we don't have major fracture if you're doing it by yourself, and 2, you don't have as much sustain, so you have to add in a few more heavy attacks, which also mean less damage. And those light attacks, like I said, are doing less damage because your max stam is lower, and since light attacks are scaling with max stam in this patch, you want buy stat food. You have to. But so don't be discouraged if you like go to parse and you're using buy stat food and you just can't sustain. It's not that possible. And this Magical Sorcerer suffers from the same thing, even with Witch Mother's Potent Brew. So don't be discouraged by it. Either get somebody to help you and provide orbs, or just use Dubious to parse. But so I'll show you the parse right now, and then we'll come back and we'll discuss group composition for raids. Start it up.
I sing it over. så sinnssykt. Jeg synger Stil så kledd og beige. Triksa mine slay. Vi slakter alt, her går alt annet enn sakte her. Så vil du være med, så må du følge med sladder i svinga. Du vet om du fucker med slay. Trekker som i morgen doomsday. Lever for å gjøre det cray. Så bli med på greatness. En maktdemonstrasjon, haters. Jeg vil ikke være som alle andre her. Så jeg og mitt crew samler alle de beste i dette landet her.
Baby, de brenner som en fireball. Vi går apeshit, alle sammen roper oh lord. Du på slave, baby, oppfør deg som en kingpin. Vi på slave, baby, oh lord.
Hvem fyller barskapet til taket? Fuck kontrollen, den mistet her. Blir så overøst at DMs. Er du støgg så kan du gå hjem. Vi tar førsteplassen her, det ikke så jevnt. Nei, jeg vil ikke være som alle andre her. Så jeg og mitt crew samler alle de beste i dette landet her. Jeg synger er på noe king shit, stedet blir så sinnssykt. Jeg synger styr så kledd og beige. Triksa mine slay. Triksa mine
Baby,
Triksa mine slay. Triksa mine
vi på slave, baby, kom og hils på gjengen. Baby, de brenner som en fireball. Vi går apeshit, alle sammen roper oh.
So that was the parse there. As you can see, when you're getting into execute, you want to cast 3 abilities on your back bar. So the Maelstrom Bow effect takes, or Maelstrom Bow ability takes effect. So that's when we'll cast Trap there. Alright, so welcome back. So this next part I want to discuss is somewhat subjective, and it's my opinion from what I've seen so far, and it by no means has to be the meta. I'm not claiming to be somebody that can, you know, create the meta or whatever. It's just from what I've seen so far and what really worked for our group on a VAA run, and I'm sure would work on other runs as well. And that's, you know, what stam DDs you bring to what stam DDs you put in your group if you're really pushing for the maximum DPS and also the best, you know, cleave in AoE trash scenarios. And the main question is, does the Stam Sorc fit in this group? In my eyes, yes. I'm not trying to be biased. I have Stam DDs of all classes, so it's not like I care either way. But I do personally think the Stam Sorc is a key ingredient in score pushing runs because of its AoE cleave that it has. It has a lot of AoE DPS, and it can still pull off really strong single target DPS. As you can see it in my Valerial DPS CMX screenshot in the description, you know, with the right group composition, it can perform really well. Those Stam Blades that were providing the War Machine weren't using Reliquians either, and they were still pulling off around 66k each, single target. And I was able to get about up to 71% using Reliquians on top of it. So it performs very closely with Stam Blades as well, if used properly. The only difference is that, you know, a Stam Blade using this same setup would have higher single target damage, guaranteed, absolutely. If it's the same skill level of a player using the same setup on a Stam Blade in the same scenario, it would pull higher DPS. But the thing about the Stam Sorc is it also has great utility on trash pulls with its huge AoEs. And if you're doing the huge trash pulls and you want to use, like I said earlier, why you want to have this skill unlocked, is the absorption field. It's like a healing negate. you silence all the enemies inside your negate, and it allows your DDs to really push large trash fights and trash pulls while also staying alive because it provides that healing. Now you can use things like a Stamina Templar using Nova or a Stamblade using Veil, but I am fairly convinced, and from my experience in that VAA run, having 2 Stamblades and a Stam Sorc, and we only had 3 Stam DDs, we were able to hit those numbers, and that was with 2 War Machines out, and so that's what I perceive right now as being good. You obviously can do 3 Stamblades, 4 Stamblades, and, you know, 3 of them running War Machine and 1 of them running Reliquian and whatnot, and it will work really well as well. But it's just something to think about. The point of me saying this is to not make it seem like Stam DD is, or Stamina Sorcerer damage dealers are dead in any way like they were thought they were going to be when this patch was coming out. It's by no means the case. They perform very well if you have one, and they can push scores in any scenario, and it's by no means a reason to drop them from group, because they still pull really good single target DPS, and they have insane AoE cleave, especially on fights like the Mage, and even VMAL. So this last part I'll get into, I don't know if anybody really cares, but you feel free to stop watching if you've even made it this far. But I'm going to discuss outfit style, just in case anybody has questions about it. That way they can see it here, and I don't have to reply to like a million, not a million, but a bunch of people asking in comments or things like that. That way you can just see it here. So I'm using Moragton arm cops, Zivkin bracers, ebony breeches, Worm Cult Jack, glass belt, Yokuden boots. I like the Yokuden boots a lot. See if I can get this out right. There we go. Ebon Shadow Dagger, right there, and Bloodforge Axe. And back where I just keep the Maelstrom look. I usually do that anyways. And then I hide helm. But a cool helmet that you can use, I like. Clear that. No. Clear. No. Okay. Undo. Do I not have it on? Where is it? Oh no. It's medium, helmet. Which one is it though? This one. Regatta. I think that one looks pretty cool. Change the white here. There you go. Look at that. It's actually kind of sexy. But yeah, so that's it for that. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to answer anything you have, any type of questions you have. But other than that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.